Today we're going to be talking about dark motivation matter versus light motivation matter. So to start, I know that you mentioned that you had either heard this on a podcast or read this in a blog. And I'm curious, why did this concept resonate with you so much that you want to talk about it today?
There's a concept that when you are driven to do something, you're driven by either dark motivational matter or light motivational matter. It comes from a podcast with a man named Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Beyond Entrepreneurship and a couple other seminal business books. And the concept basically is that when you're driven to do something, either you're running from something or you're running to something. That's what's driving you. And usually what you're running from is fear, a feeling that you're not enough, concerns about failure or being some sort of a fake or something, imposter syndrome. And when you're running to something, it's usually passion, love of what you do, desire to help others, connectivity with what you're doing. And you asked me why I wanted to talk about this. And I think it's because for me, I've been in business almost 5 years. And I'd say the first 3 or 4 were certainly majority, if not almost entirely dark matter. It was, I would sort of, I got a reputation from my employees. In fact, one of them snuck something into Slack once, which was like, if you haven't gotten a 2 a.m. Slack from James yet, you haven't been working here long enough or something like that. So late night Slacks, I wake up at 5 a.m. and, I seemed like I was really passionate, but what it was is I was just so frantically concerned that I was going to fail. I think my whole life I felt that I'm not quite enough, going to a competitive school growing up and then going to a competitive college and working at competitive workplaces. It's always this feeling that whatever my best isn't quite good enough, and that it's only a matter of time before I'm found out as a fraud or imposter. And that deep fear of failure and disappointing people, probably my dad, if I had to zero in on one person, would drive me. And I would just wake up so desperately wanting to avoid that outcome. And it's only been recently, within, say, the past year, that I think as I've become healthier from a mental health perspective, but also as my company has entered adolescence and it's actually helping people, it's actually out there in the world. It isn't just an idea spinning around in my brain, but it's actually a thing that other people are reacting to, that I feel motivated increasingly by light motivational forces. So just a passion for what I do, an acknowledgement that it's helping others, an acknowledgement that it's not just mine anymore, but also other employees that have been seminal in building it. And it's, I think it's important to have both, but I'm happy that I'm increasingly motivated by love, passion, excitement, and not fear and sort of apprehension.
There's actually a study that has proven that negative reinforcement, whether it's criticism or censure or anything like that, doesn't motivate people the same way that positive reinforcement along the way. So it's not accolades at the end of the, not the trophy at the end of the race, but the cheering during the race that actually motivates people more. So I'm curious your thoughts and your experience on being motivated in this negative way, as you alluded to, your entire life.
I think being motivated by dark matter, fear of failure and of not being enough, it can be incredibly powerful. I mean, it definitely shoots you out of bed, but I think it sort of deteriorates your self-worth and sense of self. So I think it's very corrosive over time. And so I would imagine, I don't know the studies that you're referring to, but if most of the reason why you're doing what you're doing is a deep fear of failure or some sort of imposter syndrome, that you're damaging yourself and damaging the thing that you're doing little by little by little, and that it will catch up to you at some point. But I do think it can be a powerful motivator in an acute sense, like not wanting to disappoint others or not wanting to be found out as a fraud can kind of shoot adrenaline through you. It's just not particularly sustainable.
Can you go a little bit more deeply into how motivation matter specifically was manifesting in your entrepreneurial life? Like, can you give me some examples?
I mean, I think it's just literally like, some of the therapy I've done works on slowing down the talk track. Like we all talk to ourselves, and often we're not really aware of what exactly we're saying. It's just sort of a flurry of thoughts that leads us to do something or feel some way. And if you slow it down and really try to listen, like what is each thing that you're saying? And so, as I was waking up in the morning and like drinking 2 or 3 coffees because it was early and I was tired, and like, what was I saying? Why was I doing that? Like, was it because I'm just so excited to face the day? No, it was like I've always been viewed as a creative, impulsive, high energy guy that can't operate, that can't execute, that doesn't follow the directions, that doesn't fit the box or the norm, and therefore won't amount to much. And everyone that is supporting me, like my family and friends, are secretly, privately harboring thoughts that it's just a matter of time before I face plant. And fear of face planting, and also like angry, vindictive energy that like, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna find a way to persevere and make this work through sheer willpower alone. That's what drove me. And so it was just waking up literally with those thoughts like pulsing through my brain almost every day for years.
Were there some decisions that were directly tied to it, and how did they impact the company?
I think I did a bad job deciding when to take big leaps and take big swings and when to be conservative. So I was worried that spending a lot of money and seeming frivolous or seeming foolish would reflect poorly on me, particularly in the eyes of my dad. So, for example, when I wanted to build the hub, so for the first year or two, we were just a community of creators. We used Instagram, but we didn't have any software. When I decided I wanted to build software, a sort of mentor advisor at the time took me to an agency that makes software, and they quoted me $70,000 for the idea that was in my head, which in retrospect is incredibly cheap, but at the time just seemed, that's a car, that's a fancy car. I just like couldn't comprehend that. So I politely said no and went online and found people overseas and worked with a gentleman in South Korea, and then someone in Ukraine, and then a team in Belarus, and then another team in Belarus, um, to try to keep costs down. And so I built the hub for probably 30 grand, but it was a piece of shit, and I had to burn it to the ground and then spend many hundreds of thousands of dollars to sort of undo the damage, rebuild it, build it better and in the way that it should have been built the first time. So I spent way more money in the long run because I was so fearful of being viewed a certain way instead of just building it the right way the first time. I think there are probably a lot of examples where I didn't have the confidence to sort of take the leap that I should have because I didn't fundamentally believe in myself.
And you've also mentioned in the past that in your experience, a lot of entrepreneurs, as confident and as cocky, to use a word that you've used repeatedly, are, they're also fueled by a deep, deep insecurity. Do you think that they're, by and large, fueled by this dark motivation matter? And why do you think it's so pervasive in entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I do. Um, I think there's some entrepreneurs that are truly cocky, like they're not really hiding anything. It's just like almost a delusional cockiness. If you're smart enough and capable enough, I know one in particular, it was a past client of ours. I won't name any names, but just the most cocky person you've ever met in your entire life. And I think I learned it was sort of real. And he happens to be incredibly smart and incredibly well connected, and has a good idea. And I think he will succeed. He'll overcome the fact that he doesn't really check in with himself. But I think most of those people flame out. They're so cocky that they're not receptive enough. They don't check in enough, right? So entrepreneurship is this tightrope of, you need to be able to check in, right? To access yourself and the conditional pathways that lie before you. What if I do this? What if I do that? What if I push this domino? What 16 other things will happen? And that constant checking in requires empathy, requires conscientiousness. And if you're too bullheaded and cocky, you never do that. But if you're too conscientious, if you're too empathetic, if you're too insecure, then you never have the bullheaded confidence to take big risks. So it's about this balance of believing in your idea more than you should at points, and being incredibly optimistic and strident, but that you also have to be welcoming of criticism and of feedback and to check yourself almost constantly. And it's really hard to switch between those two things.
And then my last question about dark motivation matter, you mentioned that it can be really detrimental and kind of corrode your sense of self, your business. I'm just curious, which ways did it kind of like degrade you?
Well, in the same way that I was like waking up at 5 and my body didn't want to, and I would force myself to drink 2 or 3 coffees to like hit the day hard and show up for everything. I think you just sort of, you zap your central nervous system. Like you're on high alert all the time. It's just like it's chemical, right? Like you have cortisol flooding your mood centers of your brain. Like you're just constantly on high alert. So whether it's neurochemistry or whether it's your central nervous system, not pretending to be a doctor, but when you look at a lot of mood disorders, because I've researched a lot on this, for example, you can have misshapen dendrites and synapses, which are sort of the things that form the way the brain looks, like that. And that happens either from acute trauma, like some sort of awful thing that happens to you, and your brain is just flooded with cortisol and other chemicals like that, or chronic low-grade trauma, which is the kind of trauma I'm talking about, of just constantly telling yourself you're not enough and beating yourself up and amping yourself up and amping yourself up. And it can cause true anatomical, in terms of your brain or your central nervous system, damage. So I think it's just learning this really delicate dance of checking yourself, being receptive to criticism, being open to being wrong, constantly burrowing into conditionals and seeing where your ideas go and if they're warranted or not. But that also you have to wake up every day and fundamentally believe that this is going to work. And I believe in myself. I love myself. I love my company. And holding space for both of those and switching between them. And if you're able to do that, I think you can succeed. And I think if you linger too much on one of the extremes, you fail.
Something you just said right there, checking yourself. In a lot of therapy, too, therapists often recommend that their patients check the negative thoughts that can kind of be born from dark subject matter. And so I'm curious, is that a way that also works in the inverse and can then push people towards the light motivation matter?
Yeah. Like we've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy before, slowing down the thoughts, holding the thoughts up to Socratic reasoning. So for example, I might wake up in the morning as driven by dark motivational matter, and I might say, this is going to fail. You don't know what you're doing. You're a first-time founder. Everyone knows you're a failure. Your employees think you suck. You're wasting money. This is a complete, like you're losing money every month. You're operating non-profitably. What the fuck's wrong with you? And then holding all of those flurry of thoughts up to the light, up to the, I guess that's not a Freudian slip, right? Like up to the light motivational matter, and looking at them through a filter of like, is this really true? You can realize that a lot of the things that you're telling yourself are wrong and inaccurate, and start to filter out some of the fraudulent claims, some of the fraud, like some of the negative and dark subject matter that is driving, that isn't serving any purpose other than pushing you forward in a negative, dark way. So I still have dark motivational matter. I think it's just actually practical and pragmatic, right? Like the things that I made a deck this weekend called Hard Truths for myself and for one of my employees. And it was just like, what are the 3 or 4 facts about our company that are hard to swallow that we don't want to talk about? But they're truths, they're facts that we now need to face, as opposed to being motivated this morning by anti-truths that I'm concocting to sort of trick myself into working harder today. Instead, I'm motivated by hard to swallow genuine truths and shortcomings about my company that need to be addressed. So I'm being more pragmatic about the negative things and leaning more into belief of self and belief of company and passion for what I'm doing.
I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit more about this switch. And you said it happened just about a year or so ago, about just moving more toward light motivation matter and how that kind of has manifested and any results you've seen of it.
Yeah. I think the cliche, which I found a little bit cloying, like almost gag worthy, of like, you have to love yourself before you love someone else. Um, I never really knew what that meant. You know, that people say that with respect to romantic relationships, but I think in this case, it's true with respect to a company, right? Like, I didn't love myself. I thought I wasn't enough. And I believed a lot of the negativity or perceived negativity that I took in throughout my childhood. And through doing a lot of personal work, like forget the company for a second, just therapy and work on myself and journaling and stuff, and coming to appreciate myself more and love myself more, I was able then to appreciate my company more. So that was just one shift, is just being healthier and happier as a person and being more content with myself enabled me to be more content with my company. And then another thing is that my company is out in the world. It's not just, for a long time, it was just big ideas in my head. And I was having to hold space for a whole kingdom of a company inside my brain. And you play all kinds of mind games. Is it brilliant? Is it completely fraudulent? Like, what is it? And as it actually makes it into the world, you get real data. And so I don't say this as like a cocky story or to pat myself on the back, but I received probably half a dozen phone calls from creators of ours during COVID that their husband lost his job and they became the major breadwinner in the family, and that the hub, enabled them to keep their house. Or, another one of our creators, she and her partner actually got a stalker and they had to frantically move, and she had to leave all of her gear and studio behind. And we offered to help her set up a new one in the Airbnb where they were sort of hiding out. And a lot of really happy stories about how my company is really helping people and how they really trust it, value it, how it's bringing them stability, purpose, financial security. So realizing that it's doing really good things in the world. And if I just keep doing what I'm doing, I'm really helping people. I think that was like a big moment where I realized, wow, this is like something really beautiful and I should be proud of it. And I'm not such a fraud or such a failure after all, maybe.
You also said that you witnessed entrepreneurs who are cocky and very much operating from a space of dark motivation matter. I'm curious if you've ever witnessed people who are working from a space of light motivation matter, and has that inspired you? Do they walk different? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I keep coming back, Ella, to this idea that you need a balance. If you're 100% either way, I think you lose. I know people that are completely dark and they just beat themselves up. And what that usually looks like is either like just darkness, sort of like depressive, sort of malaise, or inaction. Like they have an idea and then they second guess it. And like, so they never like have the confidence to put things into motion, to test. That they're so afraid of failure. Failure is such a big part of entrepreneurship because you test something very gently. It's like putting a little bit of weight on your foot as you're walking across ice, right? And it's like, oh, I slipped a little bit, but I haven't committed everything, so I can sort of catch myself. You need to be willing to like fail a little bit and slip a little bit and then recalibrate, and slip a little bit and recalibrate, and find the best path. So if you are too scared to slip a little bit and fail a little bit and put yourself out there at all, you don't take much action, which means you never succeed. So people that are only motivated by dark matter and are only insecure will fail. But then people that are only either cocky or just like passionate, like for me in San Francisco, there were a bunch of entrepreneurs I knew that just like loved what they did and were just in it for the passion. And they didn't seem constrained by like capitalism. Like they had no concept of money, and they didn't really care if they made money doing it. And it was just something that they loved and they wanted to help people. And, they would get taken advantage of, or they would make decisions that were imprudent from just like like a business fundamentals perspective. There was no hard nosed pragmatism driving their business. It was just sort of like all passion and airy fairy loosey goosiness. And so they would fail or just sort of like sputter along. And so again, I think you need this, like, you need to doubt yourself. You need to be skeptical. You need to be careful. You need to look down all these conditional rabbit holes and try them and pull back and reassess. But then if you do that too much, then you don't move. And if you're just floating about and doing anything that comes to you or anything you feel like, then you spend money in the wrong places, make decisions that aren't hardened or thoughtfully battle tested, and you die as well. So again, I really do think it's a balance of, for me, I think like maybe 70% light matter, 30% dark or something like that. That's probably where I am now. And I think that's a pretty healthy balance. I really wouldn't want to change it much more than that. I want to doubt myself and, you know, be afraid of failure, be afraid of slipping off the edge, be afraid of losing my edge 30%, because it does drive me and it does keep me honest and it does keep me human. But then I want most of what's driving to me to be passion and love of what I do, and excitedness to reach the next level, and to learn and to grow and adapt and meet new people and just better myself, feed myself nutrient dense meals every day. And so 70% that's what's driving me, and only 30% is fear of failure.
And my last question for you, if people who are watching this, reading this, want to make a more concerted effort to switch from dark motivation matter to light motivation matter, where do you recommend they start?
I think on themselves, just what we talked about before, like auditing yourself and figuring out what you're good at, what you're bad at, learning to be more okay with that, or doing the same for the company, like really looking at it with as much pragmatism and honesty as you possibly can. Assessing where is the company, what are we doing very well, what are we doing very poorly, trying to strip out unnecessary negative self-talk or unnecessary delusional passion, like trying to get a very clear pragmatic view of the company or a very clear pragmatic view of oneself, and then to accept that self or accept that company and move forward with a more even-keeled acknowledgement of how the company is failing and how it's succeeding, and trying to act only from measured, even-keeled practicality and not synthesize negativity to try to trick yourself into working harder, or synthesize cockiness and passion, trying to find something in the middle. I think that's what I'd recommend.